Good evening. Thanks for coming out this evening. It's nice to have a lot of people here, and we also have the live stream going for folks that weren't able to get here this evening, but it's really nice of you to be here. I'm going to ask Pastor Andrew to lead us in prayer to start.
Okay, why don't we pray? Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for this night and for this opportunity to gather here with Libby and with the people of St. James as we continue to discern where it is that you're leading us to go with our associate pastor position. We give you thanks for the hours and weeks and months and years of work that our call committee has done. We give you thanks for Lucinda and for her leadership. We give you thanks for those in council and for their discernment as well. Just a few weeks ago that has brought us to this night and to this coming weekend. We ask that you would walk with us tonight, that you would open our hearts and our minds to your presence with us, that you would guide our questions, that you would be with Libby as she discerns how to respond to these questions, that you would hold her close to you in a special way tonight and as we go into the weekend. We are grateful for her presence here and for her own discernment, and we ask that you would continue to walk with her through the end of this process. We give you thanks for all these things in the name of your Son. Amen.
Thank you. Before we get started, I just want to say a few words about call and the ELCA. In the ELCA, pastors aren't hired. They're not employees of congregations. They're called by a congregation. And in fact, in the ELCA, in order to become ordained, you have to be able to convince a committee of people, a candidacy committee, 3 different times that you are called by God to be set apart, to serve as a pastor. And you have to have not only an internal call that you hear God calling you, but you have to be able to verbalize and explain an external call that people in your life have said to you, you know, I think maybe God wants you to be doing this thing over here. And then the final thing is, in order to be ordained in the ELCA, you have to be called by a congregation to serve as a pastor. So you could go the whole way through school. Candidacy could give you an entrance decision. They could send you on, they could do what in the middle of seminary is called endorsement, and they could approve you by ordination. But if no congregation calls you, you will not be a pastor in the ELCA. And for the rest of your life to remain on the roster of pastors in the ELCA, you have to have a call, either actively serving or a call to disability, or when you're ready to retire, you get called to the retired roster. So it's not a thing as in some churches where you decide, I think I'm supposed to be a pastor, so you put on a collar and they call you pastor. It's a big deal. It's 4 years to earn a master's degree. And then the last thing is the step that you have to be called. So tonight we're not here to talk to Libby about, gee, you did a really good job as a student. That was very nice, and I liked that student teacher. She was easier than the regular teacher, so the student pastor was a lot of fun. It's not a nice to say, gee, what are your favorite things, or how do you feel about sugaring donuts? It's a night to talk about, how are you going to come in here and serve as our pastor, as one of the shepherds of our congregation? Folks were given a chance to send in some questions, so I have some on email that I'm kind of try to intersperse so that we get to all of those too. Just so that everybody can hear questions, including people watching on the live stream, I'm going to ask you to come to the mic. And then I'm going to sort of try to moderate a little bit. This is a night to talk to Libby. Maybe, Libby, you could tell us a little bit. I know you've had to explain a lot. First the call committee asked her, and then the council asked her, and I know candidacy asked her, but take us a little through the journey in your life that got you to this place.
Yeah, so my home congregation is in Port Royal, Pennsylvania. On a really good Sunday, we have about 80 people, but I am a cradle Lutheran, so I was born in that congregation, and actually my family's generations go back to the founding of the church back in the 1700s, which is pretty cool. So I grew up there. As many of you know, I have really bad food allergies. And my local school district did not have a nurse full-time, which raised some alarms in my parents' heads. And they decided that they were going to send me to the local Catholic elementary school. So I was a little Lutheran girl going to Catholic elementary school. And in that time, my grandparents were, in their late 70s when I was born. Between the ages of 6 and about 8, my mom's parents and her sister passed away. It's about a year and a half. And I found a lot of solace within the liturgy and within the church. I loved going to Mass on Thursdays, and I just really wanted to be in that space. I found a lot of peace and a lot of, comfort from those experiences. But I was told multiple times that I wasn't allowed to do anything. And I was raised by some very fierce women who told me when someone tells you that you can't do something, try to figure out a way that you can if it means a lot to you. So I became really involved with my home congregation. Started lecturing at the age of 8, acolyting, all the things that I could do there that I wasn't allowed to do at the Catholic school. Middle school came. My local school district still didn't have a nurse full-time, so I went to the Episcopal school in downtown Harrisburg. And there I experienced having a woman for the first time in ministry who was shepherding us all. Her name was Kate Harrigan at St. Stephen's Episcopal School right downtown on North Front Street. And she didn't just teach us about Episcopalianism, she taught us about world religion. And I realized that there's this element of loving your neighbor that's really present through all major world religions. And that's something I was really drawn towards. I went to Penn State, as you all know, we are. Penn State. You still got it, good job. And I became really involved within the Lutheran student community there on campus. My first weekend, I remember thinking, I'm actually an adult, I can choose whether or not I want to go to church. And then I decided, I'm an adult, I'm gonna go to church by myself. And I had the experience of actually worshiping alone for the first time in my entire life. But I was really fortunate to have this connection to this student community of Lutherans, led by wonderful Alicia Anderson. She taught us all about, Lutheranism, but we gathered mostly for community. She took me to Germany for a Luther tour in my freshman year, and I was hooked. And I became really interested in, talking about this element of grace and of love. I saw a lot of my friends go to very non-denominational churches around State College, and I saw how much they changed as individuals. That's not to say that they weren't themselves anymore, but I could tell the effects of religion that wasn't based on grace and how that kind of shifted who they were. At the same time, I had a brother that was going through a bit of an opioid crisis of himself, and he was really looking for a place that was full of grace and of love. And I think at the end of the day, it's that message of grace that we are all searching for. We don't want a God who puts up walls, we want a God who opens doors. And that is what I love so much about the Lutheran faith. It's what drew me to this place. I call myself a Catholicopalian by trade. But I love being a Lutheran, and I love being able to share that grace and that love with everyone that I meet.
That's great.
Yeah.
Someone wrote in, "Welcome back, Libby."
Thank you.
Perhaps you can tell us what you perceive your greatest strengths and interests to be, and how they might fit into the programs and needs of our congregation. I think we've had a good chance to see you in action, but hearing your reflections could be helpful.
Yeah, I love teaching. I love pastoral care, and I love one-on-one conversations with people. That has really been a highlight of my year. I love doing hospital visits and going and visiting people in times of joy and times of crisis. I talked about I had older grandparents. They were in a local nursing home when I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. And they would put me in their walkers, the ones with the seat, and they would roll me around to see all of their friends at Brookline Home. And I got really I say, good at a younger age, really comfortable talking to random people, especially older people. I always have a soft spot in my heart for people who are, separated from church for a number of reasons. But I really loved learning from their life experiences and talking to them, even from a very young age. So pastoral care, I think, is one area that I love and that fills my soul. Preaching is another one. I've definitely missed being in the pulpit for the past month and a half, and I'm enjoying being back here again this weekend. But people always ask me, how do I craft my sermons? What do I do? And I'm grateful that as a state FFA officer, I was able to learn how to, create public speeches. I was able to speak in front of thousands of people. And I think at the time, most of you know I have an agricultural background, and I suddenly decided to go to seminary. And I spent a lot of time wondering why I wasted all that time. Not a whole lot of time, but 4 years. But I realizing, that time I spent in the classroom, in front of people's public speaking, those things really do pay off, and they're useful for what I'm going to do for my career. So I think crafting sermons, I love sitting down at my computer, not really knowing what's gonna, come out. And I say the Holy Spirit, writes my sermons half the time. Pastor Andrew, I'm sure you agree. But I love, diving into the text, looking at cultural backgrounds, and then trying to find a way that can make the text relevant for us today, and challenging for what God is actively calling us to do. So I think those are the two main things I love, is pastoral care and crafting and giving sermons.
Somebody here ready with a question?
I think it was, but
There you go. Yeah.
all right. So what are some of the challenges that you think face the church, St. James and the church today? And what do you think some of the strengths of St. James are?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with church-wide, if that's okay. I am shocked at how little number of people there are going through seminary right now. I'm sure, there's a lot of people in the distributed learning pathway, but there's not a lot of people, especially my age, in seminary. I'm probably the youngest person in my cohort by about 25 or 30 years. And, when we're thinking about the future of the church, I think some of that church leadership decline in numbers is kind of built into our society, right? We have a whole lot of baby boomers. As that generation passes, there's not a whole lot of people to take their places. I also think, personally, I did not experience a whole lot of recruitment when it comes to going to seminary. We talk a lot about, Lucinda mentioned, that internal and external sense of call, but I was told personally that I needed to go do something else before I went to seminary. So I think we really do need to do a better job at encouraging young people to follow that path if that's something that they really like. And then fostering a sense of community that builds up leaders. I think that's something that we really do here at St. James. Adam has done a great job with the youth program, and I love how deep those conversations turn out to be. Even with the kindergarten, first, second graders, they really get it. And I think fostering that in a place that's healthy, that provides a lot of spiritual and involvement is really important. So that's, I think, a challenge for worldwide, for church-wide. I think here at St. James, we are a very healthy congregation. Our church growth consultant told us that this year, and I was so grateful to be part of that process. I think there's groups of people that we definitely could reach out to that we currently aren't. One area of specific interest for me, I think, because of my age and because of the wonderful experience I had at Penn State with Lutheran student community, is the fact that we don't really have a tie to the college at all. It's historically Lutheran, but their chaplain right now, as far as I know, is Catholic. They have Catholic Mass. They try to do some things with Christ, but I think that's a group of people that really are looking for some sort of a spiritual experience when they're first coming out of what they've grown up with. They're asking a lot of questions, and I had the chance to be with them a little bit during National Coming Out Day at the college this year with our RIC task force. I mean, a lot of people coming up and asking us about service times, about activities and community involvement here at St. James. But unfortunately, the follow-through for that isn't there. So I think we really need to build community with people that are my age. And hopefully, if that happens, when they have children, I think that's how the church continues. But those are just two very broad things that I think we can improve on. Overall, I love it here. I think we're really healthy, and I know I've thrived here in my internship, and I know a lot of you love it here.
So speaking of your internship, how do you envision your responsibilities changing as you transition from student to associate pastor?
Yeah, so one thing I'd like to say before I get started on that question is just a really quick thank you to all the staff. For my very first day, I never felt like an intern. I knew I was here to learn last year, but everyone made an effort to make me feel like I was part of the team and that I was an equal, especially Pastor Andrew, and I was so grateful for that. I do know that some of my priorities are going to be shifting, especially toward the end of the year last year. I could pretty much, line up my schedule. If I wanted to go have breakfast with the middle and high schoolers in the morning at 6:30, I could go do that. If I wanted to help out with childcare chapel, that was an option. I realized, though, that, I'm going to have a little bit of a different role. As opposed to a jack of all trades, I'm going to have to be a little bit more focused in where I spend my time and my energy. I love the kids. I know, Adam, you do a fantastic job with them. I'm always going to love my hugs, but I do know that a lot of my time is going to be spent, doing pastoral care visits, a lot more visiting with people, planning worship, and I'm excited to have a little bit more of a hand in that. So as opposed to more of a learning mindset, more of a doing mindset is how I would phrase that transition into an associate pastor role. Recognizing that I am an associate, but I'm still learning, but learning how to be a pastor actively while being a pastor, I think is going to be a lot different for me than learning how to be a pastor while still a student.
Joe, I think you had a question.
Good to see you where you are again. You mentioned something about visitations, getting out in the community. I have two questions, really. Pastor Nathan has indicated that there are a great number of young, single, particularly men in our area who are probably not affiliated. And I wonder how you might go about planning to reach those young folks and get them engaged in our church, would be one question. The second is one that's always been a concern of mine, that our pastors have a huge workload going to, you said pastoral visits, but visiting hospitals, particularly if they're out of town, there are some expectations by our people to have that done. Is it possible in this church or any others to commission certain lay people, perhaps with some training, but once the initial visit or two has been made, from now on you're going to see John Doe, who has a special interest in your situation and loves to visit. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so for the second one, Joe, I think that's a fantastic idea. I think Pastor Andrew and I were talking a few months ago about creating some sort of teams. Like when you have funerals, you all have the care teams downstairs that do meals. And they, from my understanding, they historically have cycled throughout. So not one group of people was responsible for everything. But I know we have a wonderful Stephen Ministry program. I also recognize that that program takes a lot of time and a lot of interest and a lot of personal dedication. I know the training time specifically is 40, 50 hours. That's a lot of time that one person needs to dedicate to be part of that program. But I think we can kind of model something around that. Having teams of 4 or 5 people that are maybe in rotation for a certain hospital, that if we do get a call, if Jane, for example, is in the hospital, I can call and I can say, hey Joe, I'm not sure what you're doing this afternoon, but Jane's in the hospital. If you could go and visit her, that'd be great. Joe, if you're not available, I might call Mark. and have like those lists of people that are kind of on call for us for pastoral care, and then kind of making lists not only based on availability, but also based on personal life experience. So if we have someone who is suffering, for example, from cancer, maybe having them paired with somebody who has that similar experience. I think that's something that we can definitely move towards, recognizing that, we have a lot to do. Pastoral care certainly is important, but there are times where, we can definitely call on the wonderful support we have here, and the wonderful amount of life experience that we have here at St. James too. So I think that's a fantastic idea. As far as the first one, as far as how to really engage young people, I think that's something that's really tricky, and it's something so many churches are facing. For me personally, whenever I was looking for a congregation, I was looking for something that fed my soul, but also wasn't just about church. Church is important, but I think community work and doing good work outside of the church's walls is just as important. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't encourage them to come to church, we should, but having a day where we go out to Spirit Trust and do some sort of a community project and encourage them to come to church maybe afterwards on a Saturday afternoon. Creating opportunities for engagement outside of worship, I think, is really important, but also creating community within those spaces too. I think worship and being here definitely does create community, but the number of times that I've gotten to know a lot of people have been outside of Sunday mornings or Saturday evenings. And I think community is something that people my age really, really want. And no one tells you how to make friends as an adult. It's really hard, and it requires a lot of effort, but creating spaces for those people to build friendships and to create community, I think, is really important. How you do that, I think, varies, but I think creating community service projects, having pizza after church, food is always a good thing. Everyone loves food. Creating those type of environments that are welcoming and inclusive, because church is scary. And a lot of people, I know myself included, have had a lot of negative experiences in congregations and churches. And a lot of people come into the doors not really knowing what to expect. So a worship service as a first, here's how we're going to get you in the doors, might be important, but I think there's other opportunities for engagement before, and to kind of teach them about, who we are, what we believe, before coming into worship. I hope that answers your question, Joe.
What are you looking forward to most about being an associate pastor?
I'm looking forward to being able to finally live out my call. For the past, 4 years, I've, been in classes. The past 3 years, I've supply preached at a couple different congregations at home and near here. But there's always been a lot of things that I couldn't do. I'm so excited to welcome people into the body of Christ through baptism. I'm excited to officially be able to consecrate the elements and to share the Lord's Supper with you all. And I think finally being able to feel like I'm finally living into that role, I think, is what I'm most excited about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Heidi?
I know we've asked a lot
I
of
called you
questions.
Heidi. Holly.
Huh?
I called you.
Oh, that's all right. You didn't. My brothers don't call me by my right name either, so we're okay. I know we've asked a lot of questions about you and how the future looks for you. I'm going to ask you, what do you expect or need from us as well?
So I know myself. I've always been a bit of an overachiever, not, by, I don't think intention, but just who I am. I grew up on a farm. If someone says to go out and do something, I went out and did it. But I've always been a really hard worker, and I know that that's good. I also know myself, and I know I tend to overcommit. Case in point, graduated Penn State in 3 years. I'm done with seminary a little bit earlier than I should be, but I love to learn, and I just didn't think about it. I think, one of the things that I really loved this year, I've got COVID twice over the past year, and both times, a number of people who have reached out to me asking if they could bring me soup, Dayquil, what they can drop off, what I need, making sure I'm going home at a decent time, and if I need it, taking a nap. Those little things, they might not seem really important, but I really do need that reminder. I know that I can't, serve other people if I'm not taking care of myself. And I try to do that, but it's nice to have a little bit of an extra reminder every now and then. And I love how this space and how everyone here really feels, I would say, like equals. But I love how you see us and Pastor Andrew and myself this year as people who are just people, And I love the humanity that you have all, seen in us, and the understanding that, we do have really busy schedules, and, we do have family things going on, and the grace in this space to be able to take care of that is something that really means a lot to me. So, thank you.
Actually, Holly, I want to share with everybody, that's a good question. Mm-hmm. And on the call documents, on the original mission site profile, we had to say the call committee had to say what we would do as a congregation. But then on the part of the documents for the actual call itself, specifically with Libby, we had a name, the congregation will encourage this pastor's ministry in the following ways. So the call committee recommended they only want you to do 5, but they also only want you to only give 5 things for what the pastor's going to focus on. But we said we would, as a congregation, and the call committee recommended and the council accepted to stay with those, support the new pastor in her transition to the role and greater responsibilities of associate pastor with our own gifts of time and talents, listen to, pray for, and support the pastor spiritually and emotionally, provide constructive feedback, financially support the church budget, and provide training in the financial matters of the congregation. So that was a good question that we ought to all think about. What's our part? You talked about, I really shouldn't be graduating from seminary yet, you overachiever.
Yes.
And when I sat down to chat with her one time, I said, wait, I don't understand the timeline. When did you get out of college? And she said, well, yeah, I did college in 3 years. So this is kind of a habit on your part. And you have indicated to folks continuing education, and I know at one of the Advent dinners, you talked about, just at the table conversation, about a doctorate program. And you said that the program was designed for working individuals. So have you applied to such a program? Have you been accepted? And if so, when do you start? And how do you anticipate managing a full-time career as an associate pastor and all of its expectations, and schoolwork and class requirements, plus self-care and a healthy social life?
Yeah, all the important things. So the program I'm really interested in, and I think I have all the materials and I haven't heard anything back yet, is at Eastern University. It's near King of Prussia, and it's associated with Palmer Theological Seminary, so it does have that faith-based aspect to it. The specific program is a PhD in nonprofit organizational leadership. So both of my parents have PhDs. It's something that I've always really wanted to be able to do, but I also was raised by parents who told me, you know, if you're going to get a degree in something, you want it to be something that's going to make a difference. So, for example, I was thinking about applying to ULS just opened up their PhD program. But it was all theological. And I really wanted something that allowed me to solve a problem. And for me, you know, I'm really interested in church growth dynamics, you know, these trends of people graduating from seminary, you know, how old they are, what future trends of the church will be, etc. And this seemed like a program that would allow me to, you know, really investigate that. I've not heard anything yet, but I do know that the program is set up that you only take 1 or 2 classes a year, or a semester. So the way it is, so at the beginning of each semester, you would go for a day and a half out to Palmer, and that is all the in-person interaction you have for that semester. The rest of your classes are asynchronous, which means you do them at your own pace. And then also, you know, they're all online. So I can really work and chip away at it at my own, you know, timeline and leisure. I also know myself, I love learning, and I know that, you know, continuing education is really important to me, but I know it's really important to us here at St. James as well. And I really wanted to put that continuing education to work as something that I hope will benefit the church as a whole going forward. Ideally, I would love to teach a class or 2 at the seminary and be active in ministry at the same time. But I didn't want to take time off to go get a PhD because I was afraid I was going to lose touch of what's actively happening in churches. And I want my research, whatever it may be, to be timely but also to be applicable to the church as it currently is. And a lot of my friends, you know, they started working churches and thinking about a PhD or a doctorate in ministry, and they just never do it. And I know that if I want to, you know, have that goal, I want to be able to do it right after my master's degree, but also do it in a space that fosters learning and encourages continual learning and continuing education. So just so you all know, that's my current plan. I will let you all know if that changes, but I haven't heard anything back from them. Hoping to, though, in the next month or so.
I've been sort of trying to balance off the ones people sent in ahead of time and people in the room, so it's your turn.
Can you share over this past year that you've been at St. James as an intern, seminary intern, what were some of your most satisfactory moments here at St. James?
Yeah. So for me, I think I loved Pride weekends. That was the first time that I had the chance. I think Pastor Andrew was away that week. But I was able to go and interact with people and share, you know, what we believe as Lutherans and really be able to go out and spread the good news and the gospel in a place that wasn't church. And I loved that experience, and I loved, you know, the outpouring of love that came from that event. And the number of people who came up to me and gave me a hug and said, "I've never seen a girl in a collar before." But knowing that, you know, those people are, and I think everyone is searching for a space that is welcoming and loving and affirming. And I was fortunate to be able to be there and, you know, hear people like just talk about their own faith experiences and how they never felt at home anywhere. And thanked us for being there. So that was one thing. I think another thing, some of you know, there was one 8:15 service, slightly after Jim Loheis died, that I was a bit of a wreck. One thing I love about pastoral care is that I love meeting people where they are. I love caring for people. I also know that I am deeply empathic. I tend to feel things with people, but there's something really special about that journey I was able to take with that family, and I can't really put into words. I've had a lot of family members who have passed away from cancer. It's kind of my thing. But I think everyone has their thing that kind of gets you, right? And for me, that was it. But being able to walk alongside that family in the midst of, Jerry's stepfather passed away, and then 3 months later, Jim got, found out how bad his cancer was. And being able to walk alongside that family and care for them, especially Jerry and the kids, has been so special. And, knowing that, this place is a space that loves and that cares for people. And, they were there, I think the weekend afterwards, and just seeing the outpouring of love and support for them, for such a family that has been so involved in this congregation, warmed my heart. And I love seeing how much we all love each other, too. So.
In the past, you have indicated the desire to have a small congregation, and the call committee and the council talked with her about this too, because when she first came, she kind of said that she thought she'd be returning to a small country church. And we said, well, St. James certainly has aspects of being rural. It's not a small country church. Someone wrote in, how do you feel about being the associate here instead of having your own parish?
Yeah, so that was something that definitely changed over my seminary experience. I think a lot of that had to do with seeing what was going on at my own home congregation. So we had a pastor of about 12 years. His name was Pastor Charlie. He really led me through a lot of my initial faith and spiritual development throughout middle school and high school. He retired when I was a senior in high school, so right before I was about to leave for college. And I really was a little out of touch at home, but my dad got elected as head of our call committee. And I knew it was a little hard, but we hired a pastor. It really wasn't a good fit. And I think he said, he was the only person we could get. And I think that really, taught me a few things. One, that, we do have a pastor shortage, but also that there are a lot of things that systemically I think the church needs to adapt to. A lot of challenges facing church-wide. And I realized that, I tried to picture myself. I said, okay, what happens if I'm called back home? How's it gonna go? And I thought, honestly, probably not great. And I realized, not because I'm not confident in my own abilities, but I don't have the skill set to be able to solve a lot of the problems that some small rural churches are having. Challenges as far as church attendance, making sure that, finances are set. I definitely don't have that experience yet. And I was grateful to be in an internship site that allowed me to learn, but I also realized something that was really important to me. It's not just, being able to have the skill set to go to rural churches, but also, if those churches feed my soul. I sat down and talked to my bishop this year when I was thinking about switching synods, and he said, finding a pastor for a church is important on my side, but it's also important for me to find a place where a pastor feels like their soul is being fed. And I love rural America, but I also really like being somewhere that I can go downtown and get a cup of coffee and walk half a mile instead of driving, 15 minutes. I love being able to be part of, all the arts and the culture, and, going downtown and seeing a whole bunch of people salsa dancing on the square and not having any idea what's going on. But I think those are the things that feed my soul. I love that Gettysburg has a vibrant arts council. We have the seminary up on the ridge. Really a lot of focus on education and learning, and a really vibrant community. And I think those are the things that I've always wanted. I just didn't know what that looked like until I came here. So that's definitely shifted. I do appreciate that St. James, has a pretty solid mixture of rural and urban, or we're not really urban, but town people. I am able to keep in touch with my agricultural roots with the big farming families that come here to St. James, but I'm also able to, really be involved in our community, I think, for the first time in my life, and I have just really appreciated that.
I should have, at the same time, there was a follow-up question. What will your plan be if if some years down the road you do receive a call to that small parish?
I think that depends if it's an intrinsic call or an extrinsic call. So I do know that being an associate is a time for me to learn and a time for me to further discern what my ministry is going to look like. You know, if I am intrinsically feel that I am being called to a small rural parish, I think that's something that I will, consider down the road. But I think for me right now, I'm just excited to take the time and learn what it means to be a pastor before tackling some of those challenges I alluded to, in small rural churches. So I think that's something that considers some further discernment.
Being one of the latest new members of the congregation, growing up in this town, I always heard about St. James and was more involved at Christ Church for a number of years. But we moved away, and we were away, and we just came back, and we were looking for a congregation, and somebody said, well, you ought to go over to St. James to see what it's like there. So we did. I was so pleased to be able to almost walk through the door and run into people that I knew, one of them being the Hills. They invited us to dinner, and I met Libby for the first time almost within a week or so of the time we walked through the door. So I had a good chance to talk to her then. My question is, a number of people walk through the door, and then many, like my wife and I, become members of the church. How do you see your position in helping those people become involved in particular things within the church? Mm-hmm. Now, we are involved in Sunday school and a number of dinner with eight and so forth, but how do you see directly looking at those new people walking through the door and then letting them know what are the things that are happening within the church, and where do you think you might best be suited to helping the congregation? So that's my question. How do you see us becoming a part of the congregation? There are so many things happening here. How do we learn to focus on something in particular?
Yeah, so great stewardship question. I think, one of the things I really appreciate about stewardship is that it focuses on three different things. So you have financial stewardship, which is always important. You also have stewardship of your time and stewardship of your talents. And I think for us as pastors, that's going to be something that starts with a conversation. But my goal this year, when I see someone I don't know coming in the door, I go over and introduce myself. Go over and say hi, and hopefully have a good discussion with them. But also paying attention to what they tell me about themselves, right? So if someone says, I own my own knitting company, for example, I'll tell them, oh, well, we have a great quilting group, be involved in that. I think that is something that is one of the roles of a pastor, is identifying those things that really spark joy in people, and then matching them with things that are going on here at St. James to connect them with things. If they are really active in, any music Gettysburg things, I know you and your wife, I've seen you the past couple weeks there. If they love to sing, connect them with the choir or with Martin Luther Choir. And I think that's something that I really like to do too. I like connecting people with opportunities, but not just things that, I've always said, just because someone teaches high school, for 20 years doesn't mean that they want to teach high school youth group. But really paying attention to what they love and what brings them joy, what sparks joy in them, and then connecting them with service opportunities that allow them to utilize that joy. Is something I think we already do, but I think there's always room for improvement.
I think that, and my wife would probably agree with this. My first congregational meeting, I became the representative to the synod.
Yes, you did.
But I need to know all of the things that are happening within the congregation, mm-hmm. and I see a need for finding out when all the meetings are and what's happening to better guide us to a particular place that maybe we want to plug in. So
Yeah.
just a thought in mind. I don't know how other people feel when they walk through the door, particularly with the latest class, so to speak, of those coming here. But I think it's very important that there be follow-up. And I would just sort of like to see, maybe some more of
absolutely.
that follow-up. Not that we aren't becoming a part of
Yeah.
everything and getting to know, and that's the hardest thing, is getting to know names, and being a part of the Sunday school and so forth. But there is a real need, I think, for follow-up, just so that they know all the things that are available within the congregation.
Yeah, I think it's a fine balance, right? Because once someone joins, you're not sure exactly how involved they want to be, one, but you want to make sure that if they are involved, they have the opportunity to do so. I've heard in the past, we've had, in high school, we called them involvement fairs, where, different committees would set up booths for new members and, talk to them about those experiences. We do publish in the Messenger a calendar with all the meeting times and schedules and everything. But I don't think, and I know we have a booklet of each of the different committees, a brief description, who's on them, but we can definitely do a better job at communicating when those things are happening and follow up with new members. So that's a great challenge for us over the next year.
I have a comment and a question. It's been really exciting the last year to watch you work with Pastor Andrew, and it took me back 20, 25 years to when we had a co-pastorate, and it was so great to watch people enhance each other. And I kept telling people, well, Pastor Libby said this, and wait,
You can say that after a month.
Baker Libby. So that's which leads me to my question. If you are called, when you are called, I hope, when and where would you be made a pastor?
Yeah, so my original call documents will be as associate. And I think, Lucinda, that's 3 years that the Synod recommends that you be in one position before, any transition. I've heard, stories of the legends of Ed and Fritz. And I know how well they work together. I like to think Pastor Andrew and I do too. But I think that's a conversation that, needs to happen down the road. I first need to learn how to be a pastor before I can be a co-pastor. And figuring out what that looks like. But I also, before any of that happens, if that happens, I'd like to get all my education done with, so I can be an equal player, and in everything. So I think that's a good thing, and I know that that model has worked for us in the past. I think that's something that requires a few more years of learning for me personally, and then some years of discernment for both Pastor Andrew and I.
I wasn't sure, were you asking when also would she actually be a pastor, or no?
I was actually asking about when she'd be
Oh,
ordained.
that's a
so
great question. I don't know that.
The big problem is, even if we call her, presuming we call her Sunday, we're 3 days away at that point from Lent. And the church traditionally, during Lent, doesn't do baptisms, weddings, ordinations, all of that. So the bishop is well aware. I saw him yesterday and I talked to him last week, that we are anxious. And so I know that they are having conversations. The Lower Susquehanna Synod feels very strongly that a pastor is not ordained to a congregation. They are ordained to the whole church. And for that reason, our synod has a very, I think its whole life history, that ordinations are not held. Like, it would not be Libby's option to have it at her home church or to have it here. The synod decides where and when it will be. And I haven't heard anything. To the best of my knowledge, there is none scheduled. I do know that the bishop loves to have ordinations at assembly, And he said, don't worry, I won't wait till assembly. And I said, that's good. So that's all I know about that. So I'm thinking it might not be till after Easter, but I don't know. Anybody else? Yeah.
I want to start off with a commendation to you, Libby. It's become apparent to me over the course of the last year that you've been here with us how much the young ladies in our congregation look up to you. I think it's powerful for them to see upon the days someone that reflects them. That brings me to my question, though. There will be naysayers. How do you address or respond to someone who may say that, in their eyes, based solely on your gender, that you're not entitled to the calling that you feel?
Yeah, I think that was something I definitely experienced, not personally, but I talked about my Catholic elementary school about being Lutheran one, but being a woman too. I knew that in that space I was not allowed to do as much as I felt like I was being called to do in the church. I do know that I look really young. I'm aware that, I am short, and that on any given day, if I'm hanging out with the high school youth group, anyone could tell me, they're like, oh yeah, she's part of the group too. I'm very aware of that. I had a few experiences when I was doing my clinical pastoral education at Hershey Med, where I knew that with my instructor, if I wanted something or if I had an opinion about something or an idea of how the class could be altered, I would ask the 60-year-old Army veteran, because he would be able to reach, our 80-year-old Mennonite instructor a lot better than I would. I think that's something that, presents a few challenges, but it's also something that allows me to have a lot of opportunities with people. Especially, I love my high school kids. I love how when I walked into youth group this afternoon, I had 4 or 5 girls swarming me for hugs, telling me how much they missed me and, asking if I was staying. And, that just, this evening filled my heart with so much, joy. I think it's one thing to be aware of, but I think it's also something to not let you stop you from doing what you're being called to do. And also understanding that, yes, I am a young person in ministry. That's something that's not fairly common, especially young females in ministry, especially, we're coming out of seminary right now. But knowing that I can connect with people in really unique ways is something that I've discovered this year. And, I have the ability to meet people where they are in a very different way than, say, Pastor Andrew is able to. And I need to live into that and not be afraid of that. So some of my favorite memories this year have been, having those conversations with, with the middle and high school kids, because I get it. And because seeing how they look up to me, but also feeling that, I look up to them as well. And forming those relationships and being able to talk when I go to visits about, which whisks people are using and kitchen things, and being able to form relationships, in very unique and very special ways has been something I've treasured this year.
Someone had written a question about, is there anything you did during your internship that you plan on continuing or discontinuing? You kind of did talk about that some, but is there anything further you would want to say about that?
Yeah, one of my favorite things this year has been our little book club that we've had over at Upper Crust. So Holly, that is something I'd like to continue. Okay, great. And I think, creating those small group opportunities has been something that I've really treasured and planning on continuing. And seeing, which other areas or groups of people, might benefit from those type of interactions, because they're my favorites. I love that we get to know each other, but we also get to have really good and difficult conversations, but it doesn't feel intrusive. I think I've learned, from people and built a lot of really strong connections in those spaces, and that's something that I hope to continue.
I just wanted to mention to folks too that in the mission site profile, we had to say what were the 5 things we were really looking for in a pastor, which we had identified as innovation, creativity, looking for someone willing to take on financial management challenges, pastoral care and visitation, preaching and worship, and stewardship. And then the gifts that we thought were the top priority for a pastor would be help people develop their spiritual life, be active in visitation of members and non-members, be an effective communicator, bring joy and good humor to relationships, and be able to share leadership and work in a team. And so the call committee felt really strongly that Libby was meeting all of the things that before we ever met her, we put down on paper that we needed. I have one more question that somebody wrote in, but let me just say on behalf of the call committee that we absolutely appreciated the opportunity and the gift that the congregation gave us by appointing us to that committee. It has been an incredible honor and a blessing to serve, and so we really thank you for that. The committee is pretty tight, and we care about each other a lot because of this task that we were given. But the final, unless somebody has something else, the final question is, what do you plan to do to hit the ground running?
Ooh. Literally or figuratively, because I do love to run. I think I am excited to just be back, in a really good routine. I'm excited to, be back. I'm hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll start sometime around the 1st of March. Weirdly enough, I'm really excited for Lent. I love, the spirituality of the season, but I also love our Advent midweeks. And I'm excited to reconnecting with all of you and sharing meals with you during that time. I think for me, one of the first things I'm going to do is sort through all the books in my office. Thank you, Pastor Andrew. And, take some time to really sit down and think about how best, I can make this transition as successful as possible. I also, I'm really excited to, get back into the swing of things as far as, the book club that we had, being part of Bible study again, and sitting in on committees, and just honestly, I miss having a full schedule. The past month and a half or so have been really good for me to kind of take a step back and not do as much, but I'm being honest, I'm going a little bit stir crazy. So I am excited to kind of be back in this space with you all, and seeing what the next year looks like for all of us.
I think we don't want to hold people longer, and that covers all the questions people sent in, and seems to be what you all came to ask, and I think you did really well. We already know what gifted you are. So thank you, and remind folks that there are no proxy votes. If people want to vote, they have to be here this Saturday and Sunday. So we'll see you then. Thank you, Libby.
Yeah, thank you all.